This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show. And our Moonlighter for today is a wrestler. We have not had a whole lot of wrestlers here on the podcast, but I've always been fascinated by the discipline, the determination, the strength, the grit that it takes to be a wrestler, especially at the highest levels. And so it's always fun to bring a wrestler on the podcast. And our Moonlighter for today is an extremely accomplished wrestler, a guy that is on the cusp of qualifying for his very first Olympics. His name is Kyven Gadson. Kyven Gadson grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, where he was a two-time Iowa State high school champ. After high school, he went from Waterloo to Ames, Iowa, where he wrestled for the Iowa State Cyclones. He was a three-time All-American for the Cyclones, and in his last ever collegiate match, he pinned future Olympic gold medalist Kyle Snyder to win the national championship. And that last piece on his mantle is getting to an Olympics and getting an Olympic medal. And the Olympic trials are April 2nd and 3rd. So they're less than a month away. Right now, Kyven Gadson is training to make that Olympic team. But being a wrestler is only part of the Kyven Gadson story. Kyven Gadson, he's got his college degree. He's got his master's degree. He's an extremely well-spoken, well-educated guy. And he's also a leader. He has founded the national nonprofit group Black Wrestlers Association to try to get more African American kids into wrestling. He's also the founder of the Be Rare initiative, which is an initiative to help create healthy social, emotional, and learning patterns through creative outlets to give each kid the opportunity to be rare. Kyven Gadson, he's a really interesting guy. It was so much fun to get him on the podcast. Not only does he have like that hard edge of a wrestler, but he's also a really fun guy to talk to. And so it's always fun to get somebody on the podcast that has part of their career, maybe the biggest part of their career, still out in front of him. So I wanted to put this podcast out a couple of weeks before the Olympic trials, so all of you Moonlighters out there can listen to this interview with Kyven Gadson, and we can all cheer him on as he tries to make his first Olympic team here in just about 3 weeks. So enjoy today's episode with Kyven Gadson. And if you like what we're doing here on the podcast, make sure to subscribe to the Moonlight Graham Show wherever it is that you get your podcast. And we would love it, folks. We would love it if you left us a 5-star review. You can also follow the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. So enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter Kyven Gadson. Where are you at, Ryan? Are you in Waterloo?
No, I'm in Ames. I train out of Ames still. So I train out of the Cyclone Regional Training Center in Ames, which is essentially affiliated with USA Wrestling and Iowa State. And so I train with the college guys on a day-to-day basis, just like I would be in college, except for there's more of a focus on the freestyle aspect of the training.
So you're 28 now, and you're in the wrestling room with guys 10 years younger than you. You know, how different is that from like, you know, where you were at as an 18-year-old to where you're at as a 28-year-old, but it's essentially the same room.
Yeah, it's it's different, right? Because when I came in and when I was 18, I think so Zabriskie was there. So David Zabriskie was NCAA champ, right? And you're getting to, you know, bang heads with guys that have won NCAA titles like right away, right? They're no longer on the team, but they're still training. So it's an important role, in my opinion. And it's like special because you're still in a place that you're familiar with, but it's just a different role. You know, you're helping a little bit more to prepare the guys. You're like in that in between stage where you're not a coach, but you're not like a student athlete, but you're kind of an extension of the staff and even in ways like maybe an extension of the team a little bit. So it's unique.
Do you find that the college kids will share stuff with you that they might not share with a coach?
Yeah, some of them have like closer relationships that are like, like brotherships, I guess you would say. And, they just like feel more comfortable, right? Like I'm not going to be handing down any, suspensions or anything like that. But, yeah, I think in a way, yeah, like you feel a little bit more comfortable when someone's going through that day to day, like grind and training with you. And so, yeah, I think in ways, yeah, the college guys feel a little bit maybe more comfortable with me than they do maybe sometimes some of the coaches.
Right. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Iowa State high school championships here in Iowa, and you posted a picture of yourself in like third or fourth place as a sophomore on that podium. And it got me thinking, like, of course you won it your junior and senior year when you're at Waterloo East, but you didn't win it, your sophomore year. And I'm not sure if you made state as a freshman. And it got me thinking, like, what's it like to stand on that podium when you're not the top guy? And because it takes a while for them to hand all the medals out. And so what are you thinking when you're not on top of the podium?
So, yeah, my freshman year, I didn't make it to state. The guys that took first and second at district ended up taking fifth and sixth at the state tournament. And that was at 125 pounds. And then the following year, I moved up to 145 pounds my sophomore year, and I ended up in the finals. So I ended up taking second, lost to Derek St. John, who's one of the assistant coaches at Iowa State in the finals. And I can't remember the exact feeling I had while I was up in the podium. Like, it was pretty fresh, right? And I remember before the match, and this might sound bad, but like I knew Derek was like a better wrestler than me. Like at that point, I knew he was just like a better, more skilled, like refined wrestler than me. Going into the match. So my whole goal going into the match was just compete as hard as I could. And from the jump, like I came out firing, but I didn't wrestle with great intelligence. Like I didn't wrestle with great intelligence. I just kind of was like reckless. And so I got beat up pretty bad. And I remember telling myself before the match, like, well, if you lose, like, you're not going to cry, and so I remember getting off the mat and like I got beat 18-6. And I was like, man, do you know how many like people just saw me like get beat up like that? Right. Like people all across the state. It was more about like probably like high school girls just saw me like get embarrassed, and
the wrestling cheerleaders on the side of the mat,
and it was like, I do not ever want to feel like this again. Like I remember exactly coming off the mat, and I walked to the back, and there's like a little tunnel, and one of my teammates, Kirk Salas Jr., was crying. I was like, what are you crying for? And he was like, man, we just got beat up. And I'm like, we? Like, I was like, bro, like, I just got smashed, And it was just, for me, it was like, I don't ever want to feel that way again. And so it was like, what do I need to do? And the biggest thing was just start listening. Like I wasn't super coachable. Like I butted heads with my dad a lot from a coaching athlete perspective. And so after that, it was like I was brought all the way down to earth, because it was like, you're not as good as you think you are. And he always used to say, like, butt whoopings are free, Jack. Like that was one of his like phrases. And he was like, when you want to listen, he always would say this too, like, when you want to listen, you come find me. Like, I'll be here. And so after that, it was just like, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, as long as that never happens to me again. And the rest of high school, like I was undefeated the rest of high school after that loss.
When you're on top of the podium, your junior and senior years, did you smile or did you mean mug it?
I didn't smile. And like, that's what's interesting to me, right? So like you go from taking second to junior year, pretty dominant for the most part, like all year. At the state tournament, had 3 pins going into the finals, and then I won 3-2 with a takedown with like 30 seconds left in the finals. So I think I wasn't super proud of that performance my junior year, so I didn't show like a ton of emotion. Like I showed emotions in the semis when I got a pin. Like pins get me excited. They always have. And then senior year, I got a pin in the quarterfinals against the defending state champion, and I showed emotion, was super jacked up. But then I almost got upset in the semis. And then in the finals, I wrestled a friend and beat him pretty handily. And so I didn't really celebrate that either, if I remember correctly. But
you didn't want to show him up kind of deal?
Yeah. Kind of in a weird way, kind of like took the foot off the gas. Like it was like, all right, this match is controlled, like you did what you needed to do to win. And you still dominated, but like it was respectable, I guess, in a way.
So you kind of mentioned that your dad might have pushed you pretty hard growing up. Did you ever feel like, since he was your high school coach as well, that like some of that was almost personal? Like he's like, come on, Dad, you're just doing this to me because I'm your son, not because I'm just another wrestler?
Yeah. Cause like, I mean, I was pretty, I had a quick emotional triggers. And so
you and me both,
like hot tempered, whatever. But like I just remember he kind of took a step back when I got to high school. Like he had his boundaries, and I think he had made some decisions with my older brother that didn't pan out, in terms of like my older brother, like seeing maybe the success that he was capable of seeing. And so with those, I guess, lessons or failures, he took a different approach with me. And I think, that was probably more beneficial for me, because he was like, I'm not trying to make maybe the same mistakes, he really wanted to see me thrive, but he knew that if you press too hard, it's not a good outcome. If you don't press enough, it's not a good outcome. So I think we found that balance, and he let me come along at the pace I was willing to come along. And once I really bought into his plan and what I needed to do, in terms of just being coachable, it was like, the trajectory just was going up.
So there's been a ton of great wrestlers from Waterloo over the years. Dan Gable obviously is the most famous of them. Where do you rank among the greatest wrestlers out of Waterloo?
Greatest wrestlers out of Waterloo. I don't think I get to put myself in that category thus far.
Really? You're not even in the conversation?
Well, I mean, like you have I think 13 or 14 NCAA champs with ties to Waterloo. So I guess I'm in the top 15.
Wow.
But I would like to see where I'm at when it's all said and done. But I mean, I'm proud of what I've done thus far, right? Like, I'm proud of what I've done thus far. Confident in my abilities to achieve more, moving forward. Like we're a month out of Olympic trials, right? April 2nd and 3rd in Fort Worth, Texas. So a month closer to have an opportunity to realize like a childhood dream is something that maybe a lot of people don't get that close to. So I'm proud of what I've done and the support I've received thus far to get to where I'm at, because you never do those things alone. And I'm excited to continue to build that.
Did you ever play any other sports growing up?
I did. I played all of them. So I was like taekwondo, track, football, baseball. I even played a little bit of basketball in middle school. But when I got to high school, I was like 125 pounds. And I'm looking at my dad, I'm looking at my mom, I'm looking at my brother, and I'm like, well, no one's really like big, right? And I always had these dreams. I was going to be like a star NFL quarterback or NFL receiver, right? Like Randy Moss. And I was like, well, if you look at it, if you're like genetics, bro, like you're probably not going to be 6'4", right? Running a 4.4 40, right? So when I got to high school at 125 pounds at 14 years old, it was like, all right, well, let's just focus on wrestling this year. And then when I didn't make it to state, it was like, all right, you need to focus on wrestling your sophomore year. And then you make it and you take second. It was like, okay, like you could play football, and football was one of those things where I felt like there was a lot of politics, right? Like I think in a sport like football, like you can be better than someone and still they can get picked over you. Whereas like wrestling, you have
it's real clear
control. Yeah, it's for the most part. Like if I'm beating you and then I'm going out and outperforming you, there's no question about it. And so
like wrestling and track and field, cross country, there's no politics. Like you are what your results are. That's exactly
Yeah. And so I just was like, you know what, I'll just stay in the I like that control factor of it, right? And so I just was like, all right, I'll just focus on wrestling. And we didn't have the best football program and in other programs at my high school. And so the cultures weren't, I would say, proper. So it was just like, I don't want to put myself and my, I guess, career at risk, doing something that's going to, essentially like jeopardize myself.
So you go to Iowa State, Gable was an Iowa State guy. Iowa State's got this long history of wrestling through the years. Cale Sanderson, Dan Gable. I mean, just so many guys, right? And you step in that room, but you had only kind of been taking wrestling seriously, like you said, for the last 4 years or so. So you redshirt that first year. Where did you find out, like, where you measured up when you stepped into the Cyclone wrestling room?
Well, I knew right away. It was, I knew right away. So I get to college, I'm coming off of shoulder surgery, and can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
Okay. I'm coming off of shoulder surgery, and my first practice back happened to be with John Reeder. And John Reeder was a 2011 NCAA champ and at Iowa State. And that was my first live wrestling practice back. And it was at 6:30 in the morning, and it was like a 30-minute grind match.
Like one match lasts 30 minutes?
Yeah, like you're just wrestling live the whole time. It was like 30 or 45 minutes. And I just remember not scoring a single point in that like 30, 45 minutes, right? And I'm coming off being what I think is good, right? And I'm like, yo, like I can
say champ.
Yeah, and I'm just like, whoa, what just happened like after that practice? And I remember calling my dad and just being like, yo, like, I don't know, like, if this is for me, and he always used to say, like, it takes guys some time to get adjusted, to the college ranks and stuff like that. And I'm thinking like, yeah, whatever, like I'm going there and I'm gonna be the guy. Right. And John just like tears me up. And my dad just basically told me like, hey, just get ready for the next practice, right? Like it's just next practice thing, right? Like what happened, get ready for the next practice. And I remember that evening, I wrestled John again, and it was just a 7-minute match, right? And in the 7-minute match, like I wrestled him well. Like I scored like maybe a takedown and a reversal. And I'm like, and John beat everybody that year. Like he was undefeated. Wow. Dominated, like was top 3 in the Hodge voting for like, which is like the wrestling Heisman.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, like I can wrestle, like, but there's a difference between like a high school kid that has only wrestled, like 7-minute matches. And then you're putting them against a grown man that has been doing this, 30-minute, 40-minute goes for the last, 3 or 4 years. And so that gave me a ton of confidence. And then we got to our first tournament of the year, and I wrestled a top 10 guy and I beat him. And so right away, I felt like I belonged. The thing that threw me off a bit was the injuries. The injuries hampered some confidence and some belief for sure.
How do you not dread going to practice every day? Like in other sports, like, baseball or basketball, there are fun parts of the sport. Like you can take batting practice, hit home runs. You can have a 3-point contest. You can, some guys can dunk it. In wrestling, it's just like a grind and, a brutal workout, maybe twice a day, every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I would say like the thing that was like what I realized, and like maybe you got to be a little bit twisted, right, to be like a good wrestler, a great wrestler, is like I remember like being in high school and being in like battles, right, and be like, oh man, like smiling, like if there was a bad call or someone got me, like oh man, like that was nice, like. But I've understood, and this maybe even more so just recently, is like because I had dealt with the injury, and so I hadn't been able to wrestle for a little bit. It was like wrestling is really fun for me, and it's relatively like easy when I'm like laughing and smiling through practice, right? Like I'm like if I get taken down, I get taken down, right? But I'm like enjoying figuring out, okay, why did that happen, and maneuvering so it doesn't happen again. Or like the like nasty parts of it, just smiling, right? Like just smile a little bit, right? Because you really get to do something that you love to do. And although it's hard and takes a lot of what you have every day, it's like special because not everybody can give that, right? Not everybody gets the opportunity to do what they enjoy and what they've loved since they were a child, And so I am trying my absolute best to keep smiling throughout it because it's hard enough, right? Life is hard enough.
Right.
And I'm coming to recognize that, right? Like life throws all different types of twists and turns that you maybe have never seen coming your way, or not how you had envisioned things to be. And so if I can make it as simple as, okay, this kind of sucks right now, but if I can smile through it, right, I can get to a different place, right? So I've been trying to really focus on just enjoying it because you don't know when it'll be over.
So wrestling, it seems like, a lot of the sports culture, like things are getting soft. They say, like people from previous generations say, oh, if you guys don't have to practice like we had to practice, and everything's getting soft now. But it seems like wrestling is still wrestling. Like I bet, when Willie Gadson was in the Iowa State wrestling room, it's pretty similar to what Kyven Gadson is doing today, right? Or am I wrong in saying that wrestling hasn't changed much?
No, I would say people are smarter. Like they did a lot of crazy stuff. Like they did a lot of crazy stuff. Like if you think about like cutting weight, like, do you know how like absurd that sounds? Like, hey, this is what you're going to do. Okay. You're going to deplete yourself of all your nutrients, your water, and all this stuff. And then you're going to go out here and you're going to compete to your highest level. Right. Like there's no way that's happening. Right. And so, there was just like it was a different grind, right? It was a different grind. Like my dad, like cut massive amount of weights, but they also weighed in the day before, did certain stuff like that. Weighed in mornings of dual meets and things like that. But it's like, there's no way you were getting peak performances out of those situations. Yes, some people were tough enough to deal with it, more so than others, but there's no way like you're getting like peak world-class, performances out of them. So I would say there's certain pieces of it that have stayed in a positive way, and then there's certain pieces that have like moved on. And I think the people that are seeing the most success now are being pretty innovative, right? Like there's still a certain grind that you have to put your body and your mind through to mentally, physically, spiritually prepare, emotionally prepare. But there's also a smarter way to do it, right? Like I don't think people were using nutritionists, like at that scale and at that level, 40 years ago and maybe even 20 years ago. But like I have a nutritionist, like he maps out my macros, right? Like there's all these pieces that encompass the whole person so that you can, consistently be at a world-class level.
So your last college match was one of the best ways a guy could ever end a college career, right? It's you against Kyle Snyder. Kyle Snyder at the time's a freshman. you're a senior, you've been a 2-time All-American at that point, you're in the finals, and then you catch Snyder. I think it was in the second period, if I'm
second period,
and you stick him, right? So you mentioned earlier, you love pins, and you catch him, you stick him, and then you give like one of the greatest interviews ever after a match where you're like, you put your arm around Quinn Kesenich and you say, all I want is some ice cream right now. It was just such a great moment. When you look back on your career right now, what does that 10 minutes mean to you?
It was so exciting. It was a culmination of a lot of like effort from a lot of different sources, a lot of, there was pain obviously put into it. There was time, there's energy. But that like 10 minutes was just pure like jubilation, like just so much excitement. And so like, it was like, wow, like this is something I've thought about doing since, like I got to watch Kel win NCAA titles. I got to watch, Nate Gallick, Roberson. I got to watch lots of, like people that I looked up to win NCAA titles, and then to be able to accomplish it myself was super exciting, and I thought that was going to be the last time I wrestled, honestly. Just because with the passing of my father, it just took a lot of different energy to keep going, because I had like used like a different wrestling had became like a different place for me. Right. Like, and so it was just like, yo, that just happened. Right. Just a ton of excitement. So I was I still am very appreciative of, those moments. And I really, really would like to enjoy another one in the next month, and then another, a few more in the following months after that, before the shoes get, metaphorically left out on the mat.
Did you have any idea when you're a senior in college that Kyle Snyder would be like your rival for the next 6 years?
Absolutely not, because I was going into my senior season, I was like, this is it, right? Like, had already started grad school and working on my master's, and so like I was prepping myself to be done, and I knew Kyle was going to be good. That is one thing that I did recognize, just like because I had wrestled him earlier that year in November, and I beat him 3-2. Yeah, I beat him 3-2. And so like I could feel like when people are going to be good, right? Like you just recognize those, you can recognize those things, you can kind of feel those things out as long as they continue to progress, right? But I had no idea he was going to get to the level that he's, gotten to, right? And so for me, watching it and I guess being a part of that story is like unique. Like I have two of, like, if I look at my NCAA bracket, like I have two of the best generational wrestlers in my generation, right? And like my, 5 to 7 year time span in Kyle Snyder and Jaden Cox, right? Mm-hmm. And so at Olympic trials, in a month, we're all going to be in the same bracket together, right? And only one person is going to Tokyo to compete for Team USA. And Jaden has a bronze. He has 2 world championships and another world bronze to go with his Olympic bronze. Kyle has, 2 world championships or 3, Olympic title, 15, 17, silver and a bronze, So I'm just trying to do my part to not be the only one left. Yeah, like to be left off that list, because I think about kind of Larry Owens, right, and Dan Gable, right? Owens beat Dan Gable in the NCAA finals. Gable goes on to win the world championships that year, then goes and wins the Olympics and goes on to this legendary coaching career. And it's like, I don't want to be that footnote in their story. right? Like,
yeah.
You beat these guys and they went on to like great, successes. I'm like, I want to experience those successes too. So that's been somewhat of a driving factor for me. Is like, I just don't want to be like that footnote in their story, like, oh, like this happened and then they went on to greatness and you kind of just like TP'd out or plateaued out. But yeah.
Well, obviously there's more to your story than just, your Olympic hopes and dreams, right? You mentioned earlier, you got your master's degree, you're doing this Be Rare thing right now, which is really cool. But then you're also doing the Black Wrestling Association, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of this stuff is really cool. So you got a lot going on. What has inspired you to, like, you got a lot going on trying to make the Olympics, but then you've also been inspired to do these other things, right? Be Rare and the Black Wrestling Association. Why take on all of this other stuff when you're trying to, not be Larry Owings too?
Well, I guess, like I said, I guess you got to be a little bit twisted maybe to be a good or a great wrestler. But there's always felt like there was maybe a need for these things, right? And when you have an opportunity to what I like to call impact, influence, and inspire people in different ways, I think you have a responsibility to do it properly, or that's just how I see it. And doesn't mean anything is perfect, but I guess I've always felt like I've had a certain purpose, right? And I'm trying to do my best with the purpose I believe that I have to give back. And when I went to grad school, it was for higher education, leadership, and learning. And I spent that whole season of 2014-15 and then took the year off, and then 16-17 working on a lot of emotional intelligence, right? And I'm like, well, if emotional intelligence did this for me when I was 22, right? Imagine if you give a kid that opportunity at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to be more emotionally intelligent, more emotionally aware of themselves. Those are the people that are the most successful consistently. And so it was like, if it did that for me at 22, if you arm and prepare a kid with that toolkit, then they're more likely to be successful, healthier. And so it was like, that's where the Be Rare came from. It's like, that would be awesome if we put a focus and an emphasis on that, because I know what it did for me at 22 years old. So as far as the Black Wrestling Association, just with growing up in Iowa in a predominantly white sport like wrestling, like I remember going to gyms all the time and being the only Black kid there, right? And so it was just like, oh, like, Dad, where are all the other Black kids at, right? Like it's like, like there's not a ton that wrestle. And so he told me when I was younger, like, well, if you're going to do it, make sure you do it to the best of your ability and do it at a high level. So these are things that I've kind of kept with me, and just trying to, like I said, like just do my best with the opportunities I have and that are presented to impact, influence, and inspire. And essentially, like you said, be rare, and so like it's hard though, because right, you got your life, right? You got your personal life, you got your professional life, and there's a lot of moving pieces to all those things. And kind of how we talked about earlier is like those things don't always manifest or go how you see them all the time, right? And so understanding that and just being able to be resilient and bounce back from setbacks and have a place to deal with adversity is like, it's what I've learned to do essentially my whole life, just like not placing they're not going to state as a freshman, right? And so I've learned a lot of lessons through wrestling.
It's cool. I've following your all the stuff that you're into, the Beware or Be Rare, the Black Wrestling Association. I watched a bunch of the stuff that you did with USA Wrestling over this past year for those Zoom calls and all of this stuff. It's just really cool. And I'm glad that, wrestling has voices and faces like you and, Jordan Burroughs. And there's a ton of guys like yourself that have spoken up that are just such great role models for a lot of kids out there. So I applaud you and what you're doing, Kyven.
I appreciate that. And I like the one thing I would always say is to the kids is don't make anybody an idol. Like, like have your people that you look up to and pull those positive characteristics you see from them. Also understanding that nobody's perfect, right? Like everybody's going through what they're going through. And so be very aware of that, hey, like everything might look like everything's great for that person, but that person's dealing with their own stuff too. Right. So that's why I try to help kids, I guess, understand and know.
Cool. Well, the way we end every episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is with the 5 big questions. So buckle your seatbelt. All right. First question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate?
All-time favorite teammate. Ooh. All-time favorite teammate. I would say I had a couple. There's a few from high school, and then there was a couple in college. But all-time favorite. Ooh, man, this is buckled. Let me make sure. Let's see. I'm gonna go with Jacob Helgeson. I was the best man in his wedding. And he spent tons and tons of time with me in high school, like after practices, just helping me get my stuff right. And he, even when we got to college, we both went to Iowa State. He was my roommate. I remember one time we were about to get in a fight, and he was like, "No, Kyven, like I got this." Like, so he wouldn't let me fight because he was like, "You got too much going on. Like, if you get in trouble, like there's a whole lot that's gonna come from that." And so
trying to fight wrestlers at Iowa State anyway. That's just a bad idea.
This dude was like hollering how he was like a Golden Glove boxer and stuff like that. And I'm just like, bro, like you have no idea. So like, yeah, I would say Jacob, because he like just like was like, hey, nah, that's not happening. Like I got it. I'll handle this one. But never had any like real serious issues after that. But he was I guess he was looking out. He was looking out for sure.
What loss hurts the most?
What loss hurts the most? I would say the last one. It's always the last one, I think, because that's just the most prevalent. I don't think I've had any of them that I haven't used to like propel me to a different level. So the last one is always very, very fresh for me.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading? Well, I have tons of books, but what I just started reading today was Together. I think it's Together We're Better. 1 second. Together is Better by Simon Sinek, the author of Start With Why and Leaders Eat Last.
Simon Sinek,
yeah. I just started reading that today.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've read a couple of his books. He's really good. It's always good perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, the coach at the Cyclone Regional Training Center, Nate Carr Sr., is always like he has this reading group. And he's always having me. I'm the voice narrator, I guess. So like whenever we have these reading groups, I'm always the person that reads. And so out loud. And so I take that job very seriously. I feel very important in that role. And so I enjoy it because you get there's so much stuff. And even when you read something out loud or you say something out loud, like, it hits a different part of the brain.
Yeah. You
right?
definitely process it differently.
Yeah. And so like, if I'm like, I'm going to be an Olympic champ, I will be an Olympic champ. I will, accomplish the feeling and the understanding of what it feels like to be an Olympic gold medalist. Like when you hear that, it's like, it hits a different part. So
you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about like role models, right? Don't put anybody too high up on a pedestal because everybody's human. But
right.
Who has been like your role model throughout your life that you're trying to emulate the most?
I would say this is like cliche, but it's my parents. Like I saw two very imperfect people, and understanding that as you get older, that they were never like as a kid, right? Like you see them as these like heroes are the best thing I hope for a lot of kids, like their parents are the best thing ever. And they love them and they just seem like they can do anything. Right. And as you grow older and your life changes and your roles change, like you start to understand like, they're never perfect. They always just did their best. Right. And so I'm super grateful and appreciative of my parents, and understanding like that they weren't perfect, right? Like they had their own struggles, they had their own issues, but they always gave me their best, and for that, like that's priceless, right? Like you can't get that back, right? Like I know my mom loves me, I know my dad loves me, and I know they did their absolute best. And looking back at it, it's like they went through their own set of traumas, right? They went through their own set of circumstances and adversities, and they bounced back from all of them to work on themselves. And I think that was important for me to recognize, like, you'll never be perfect, right? But you can, like I said, I'll never be perfect, but I'll always have a purpose, right? And so understanding that as much as I looked up to my parents and I love my parents, like I know they'll never be perfect. And so that just is, I guess, a peace of mind. So I'm appreciative of the roles that they've played in my life.
Cool. Final question here, Kyven, is what's the best advice you've ever received?
Best advice I've ever received. There's so much. Make sure you have a relationship with God. My dad said that to me when he was dealing with the cancer. Is the last thing he said to me is just make sure you have a relationship with God.
Wow.
And so that I would say that's the best advice I've ever received.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I appreciate you sharing that with us, Kyven. And you're a month out right now from the Olympic trials. And so best of luck to you this last, 30 days or so as you get ready to try to make the Olympics, man. We'll all be cheering for you here at the Moonlight Graham Show. And I really appreciate you giving us your time here tonight.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. If anybody wants to follow my journey, you can follow me on the social media platforms. Gadson Strong, Gadson Strong. Have some exciting shirts out right now.
I like that ice cream t-shirt.
And then there's some other stuff that's in the works with some special stuff coming soon. So
cool.
We'll get through this Olympic trials and we'll have some positive stuff to go.
I love it, man. Well, thanks so much.
I appreciate it.
Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer, Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.